In Pingche Village, Ta Kuling, Hong Kong, there lived a family of 4. The head of household was Tan Chenghui, 43 years old, working as a clerk in the finance office at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His job was stable, and life seemed peaceful and orderly. His wife, Tang Enyi, was 34, an accountant for an office supply company, quiet by nature, with a simple lifestyle. The couple had 2 young daughters. The older one, Tan Xiaowen, was just 10 years old, and the younger one, Tan Xiaoying, had just turned 7. This family had already endured significant hardships. Chenghui's father had been a sailor. Several years earlier, during a voyage at sea, he suddenly disappeared. Whether alive or dead, no one knew. The shock devastated his mother, causing her to fall seriously ill. After a period of treatment, she was no longer able to care for herself and had to move into a nursing home. From then on, only Chenghui's family of 4 remained in the house at Pingche. July 6th was a Monday, a regular workday. Chenghui should have been at the office as usual, but that day, he never showed up. His colleagues waited and waited, calling his cell phone repeatedly, but no one answered. The prolonged silence began to worry everyone. It wasn't until nearly noon that the call finally connected. But the person who answered wasn't Chenghui. It was a stranger, a man. He introduced himself as Chenghui's cousin, his voice hurried and somewhat evasive. He said that since Saturday the previous week, Chenghui had taken his whole family back to Dongguan to handle some personal matters, leaving his phone behind at home. As for when Chenghui would return to Hong Kong, the man answered vaguely that he didn't know either. Before he could even finish his sentence, he hastily hung up. Chenghui's colleagues found this increasingly strange. Chenghui had always been known for being diligent, meticulous, and exceptionally responsible. He had never missed work without reason, and certainly had never disappeared without a word of notice. If there really was an urgent family matter requiring him to return home, he would definitely have requested leave properly. He would never stay silent in such an unusual way. Moreover, the explanation from the self-proclaimed cousin made even less sense. According to him, Chenghui had gone to Dongguan on Saturday, but it was now Monday. The distance between Dongguan and Hong Kong isn't far, and transportation is convenient. Even if he really had forgotten his phone at home, after 2 days he surely would have come back to get it, or at least contacted someone another way. Leaving the phone unattended, not notifying work, none of this matched Chenghui's usual character. Several colleagues gathered to discuss it. The more they analyzed, the more every detail seemed wrong, so they called the police. At 1:15 p.m., police quickly arrived at the Tan family's home in Pingche Village to investigate. Before them stood a house with doors tightly shut, completely silent. Police knocked repeatedly, but there was no response from inside whatsoever. With no other option, they turned to questioning the neighbors to gather information. A neighbor named Huang said that he had also heard the person claiming to be Chenghui's cousin say that the whole family of 4 had gone to Dongguan on Saturday and might stay there for a while, which was why the house was all closed up like that. However, when police continued asking where this cousin was now, Huang seemed uncertain. He said he only knew from what the Tan family had mentioned before, that whenever this cousin visited, he either stayed at the Tan home or temporarily lodged with another relative in the same village. Beyond that, he knew nothing specific. Given the situation, police had no choice but to go door to door throughout the village, following this meager lead. After a round of searching, they finally made a discovery. At house number 74 on Engchao Road, police found the man who claimed to be Chenghui's cousin. His name was Xu Shengqi, 42 years old, originally from Zhongshan, Guangdong. Finding Xu Shengqi immediately took the case in a new direction. A cousin who suddenly appeared, answered the phone on Chenghui's behalf, gave vague explanations, then had unclear whereabouts for hours. Was he just an innocent messenger, or was he actually connected to the abnormal disappearance of the entire Tan family? The whole story actually has to begin with the tin-roofed house where the Tan family lived in Pingche Village. From the outside, it sat on a fairly large plot of land, totaling about 8,000 square feet, but the actual built area of the house was only around 990 square feet. Most of the remaining land was an open courtyard and flower garden, quite spacious on all sides. Few people knew that this place had once been a pig farm. Years ago, Chung-Hui's father worked as a sailor. During those years, he managed to save up a decent sum of money. With capital in hand, he decided to lease a plot of agricultural land in Pingche to start a pig farm. The farm had once been quite busy, serving as the main source of income for the whole family. But disaster struck when the father suddenly disappeared at sea, his fate unknown. After that, with the family's pillar gone, the pig farm gradually fell into disuse. No one had the strength or the heart to continue raising pigs. Over time, the old farm was abandoned, overgrown with weeds. Later, Chung-Hui had the land renovated, building a simple tin-roofed house for the family to live in. Notably, in recent years, all the repair, maintenance, and renovation work on the house had not been handled by Chung-Hui himself. He had delegated all of it to his cousin Xu Shengqi. This cousin Shengqi actually had an extremely difficult family background. His life seemed to be struck by one heavy blow after another. Shengqi originally had an older brother, but years ago, due to prolonged marital conflicts, his brother became mentally overwhelmed and, in a moment of despair, threw himself into the sea. Before that pain could even heal, 3 years before this case occurred, Shengqi's father fell seriously ill and was hospitalized. Unfortunately, a serious medical error occurred during treatment, and he eventually passed away. After these consecutive shocks, Shengqi's mother developed Alzheimer's disease, her memory severely declining, completely unable to care for herself. The burden of the family fell entirely on Shengqi's shoulders. His wife was just a production line worker at a garment factory with low and unstable income. The couple also had to support 2 children in school, one in middle school, the other about to enter college. Living expenses and educational costs grew larger by the day. The pressure of putting food on the table weighed on them daily, keeping Shengqi's family constantly stressed and struggling. Initially, Shengqi worked in home renovation and repair in Zhongshan. In his spare time, he also drove a motorcycle taxi to earn extra income. Though he worked hard every day, the money he earned was only enough to maintain a bare minimum existence, always living hand to mouth. That's why, when he learned that wages in Hong Kong were much higher than on the mainland, Shengqi began entertaining the idea of going to Hong Kong to work, even as an illegal laborer. He approached his cousin Chung-Hui for help. Chung-Hui understood his cousin's difficult circumstances and couldn't bear to refuse. He introduced Shengqi to some construction and interior decoration jobs in Hong Kong. Starting in 2003, Shengqi began frequently traveling to Hong Kong for work. Later, when Chung-Hui needed renovations and improvements done on his house in Pingche Village, he directly hired Shengqi to handle most of the work. After the renovations were completed, Shengqi didn't appear at the Tan home for quite a long time. It wasn't until 2009, when work in Zhongshan hit another dead end, that Shengqi once again turned to Chung-Hui for job referrals. At that time, Chung-Hui said that if he couldn't find construction work elsewhere, he could come to his house and help take care of the flower garden and look after things. On July 3rd, Xu Shengqi arrived in Hong Kong and temporarily stayed at the home of a distant relative. When questioned by police, Shengqi told a story that at first sounded reasonable. He said his cousin Tan Chenghui owned property on the mainland, and that Saturday, he needed to go to Dongguan to handle a real estate transaction. Taking advantage of the trip, Chung-Hui had brought his whole family back home to visit relatives. Before leaving Hong Kong, Chung-Hui had asked Shengqi to look after the house and also help finish the outdoor paving work that was still incomplete. Chung-Hui had specifically instructed that if he didn't make it back to Hong Kong in time for work on Monday, Shengqi should help notify his colleagues and relevant parties, explaining that he was busy with matters on the mainland. Shengqi also emphasized that Chung-Hui hadn't taken his phone when he left, so currently there was no way to contact his cousin. However, after hearing this statement, police began to sense many inconsistencies. First, it was very strange for an adult handling an important real estate transaction to go without bringing a cell phone. Could it be that Chung-Hui deliberately left his phone behind because roaming charges for a Hong Kong SIM card on the mainland were too expensive? But even if that were the case, Once he arrived in Dongguan, a major city with every possible means of communication, he could easily have bought a new SIM card or called home much earlier. There was no explanation for such prolonged loss of contact. More importantly, not just Cheng Wei, but both husband and wife had suddenly stopped going to work, with neither one requesting leave from their respective employers. This situation was clearly abnormal to the point of being suspicious. Beyond these statements, police also noticed that Shenqi's finger was injured and had been carefully bandaged. When asked, Shenqi explained it was just a wound from working with nails and bolts, accidentally scraping his hand. This type of accident is indeed common in construction and repair work, so initially police didn't immediately suspect too much from this detail. However, in a context where the family had vanished without a trace, even the smallest signs became sensitive. Before having more leads on the whereabouts of the Tan family, police decided to begin their investigation from the tin-roofed house in Pingche village itself, the starting point of the entire matter. Therefore, they directly asked Shenqi whether he had the house key to assist with the search. The moment he heard about searching the house, Shenqi immediately became visibly tense. His expression changed, his reaction somewhat flustered. Initially, Shenqi insisted he didn't have a key. But this answer immediately revealed a serious contradiction. If, as Shenqi had said earlier, Cheng Wei had asked him to watch the house while the family was away, then not giving him a key made absolutely no sense. Someone entrusted with looking after a house, yet not holding a key, this was clearly unacceptable. Furthermore, police had already gathered information from neighbor Huang that he had once personally witnessed Cheng Hui handing a key to Shenqi. Perhaps realizing his words were no longer convincing, Shenqi was forced to change his explanation. He admitted that during the earlier renovation work, he had indeed kept a spare key, but after the work was completed, he had returned it to Cheng Wei. As for this time, according to him, his cousin had left in too much of a hurry and forgot to give him the spare key. By this point, however, police could see very clearly. Shenqi was doing everything possible to avoid letting anyone enter the house. His defensive attitude was becoming increasingly obvious, as if something hidden inside couldn't be revealed. Faced with this evasiveness, police began applying pressure, sternly warning that if Shenqi continued to be uncooperative, they would have no choice but to break down the door and conduct a search according to procedure. Confronted with the police's firm stance, Shenqi finally couldn't hold out any longer. In a state of reluctance and helplessness, he obediently produced the key and opened the door to the house. The moment police stepped inside the Tan home, they immediately understood why Shenqi had been so terrified at the mention of an investigation. The scene inside was utter chaos, belongings strewn everywhere, drawers pulled open, cabinets thrown wide. Clearly the house had been thoroughly ransacked, looking exactly like the aftermath of a home invasion robbery. Not only that, but on the walls and floor of the living room, they found numerous dried bloodstains. In the secondary bedroom, police discovered a blood-stained shirt and a hollow plastic pipe also smeared with blood. In the kitchen area, there were still some dishes that hadn't been washed. In the drawer of the master bedroom, police also found the identification cards of both Mr. and Mrs. Tan. With the ID card still in the house, the entire Tan family very likely had never left Hong Kong. To verify this, police immediately contacted the immigration department to check records. The results showed that during this time period, there was no record whatsoever of the Tan family leaving Hong Kong. This meant that the Dongguan trip story Shenqi had been telling from beginning to end was complete fabrication. However, despite the mounting suspicious points, at that time, the chain of evidence was still not complete enough to conclude the full truth. To crack the case quickly, the most important thing now was to find the whereabouts of the Tan family. Police continued searching the house multiple more times, checking every corner inside and outside the premises. Finally, an unusual detail caught their eye. In the empty lot about 30 feet from the front door, the ground showed signs of having been disturbed unnaturally. The soil was uneven, distinctly different from the surrounding areas. When they conducted a preliminary test, police also detected blood traces in this area. These signs immediately made investigators suspect that beneath that layer of earth, a serious secret must be hidden. However, since it was already getting dark, and to avoid damaging the scene and any remaining evidence, police decided not to dig immediately. Instead, they quickly cordoned off the area, set up a perimeter around the suspicious zone, and sealed off all entrances and exits to Pingche village. Police immediately detained Shenki and conducted a search of his person. They found in his pocket the bank card and credit card of his sister-in-law, Enyi. Immediately after, police searched house number 74 on Chao Road where Shenki was staying. There, they found one after another Enyi's laptop and wallet, along with the cell phones of both Hui and his wife. Most notably, under the pillow where Shenki slept, they found a student ID card from Enyi's school days. As the evidence piled up higher and higher, Shenki's psychological defenses completely collapsed. Finally, he bowed his head and confessed to all his crimes. However, in his statement, Shenki repeatedly emphasized that everything was unintentional, that he had never meant to harm his cousin's family. According to him, the tragedy that led to this day originated from a secret affair between him and his sister-in-law, Enyi. Shenki claimed that over the years, each time he came to Hong Kong for work, he gradually developed feelings for Enyi. Though the two had never crossed the line, there existed between them intimate contact, an ambiguous relationship that continued in silence. On the morning of July 5th, Hui left home to visit his mother at the nursing home. Seizing this opportunity, Shenki snuck into the Tan home to see his sister-in-law. At that time, the two nieces were in the bedroom watching cartoons, completely unaware of what was happening outside. Meanwhile, in the living room, Shengqi and Enyi engaged in behavior that crossed boundaries. Unexpectedly, around 11:30 a.m., Hui suddenly returned home early. The scene before his eyes immediately sent him into a rage. In his fury, Hui grabbed a fruit knife and charged straight at Shenki, his demeanor completely out of control, as if he wanted to fight to the death right there. Shenki couldn't dodge in time and was forced into a direct physical struggle with Hui. In that chaotic moment, his emotions completely spiraled out of control. The two men grappled violently, the sounds of collision ringing sharply through the cramped space of the house. Shenki's mind went nearly blank. He was barely conscious of what he was doing, reacting purely on instinct to defend himself. By the time he suddenly came to his senses, everything was already too late. Hui lay motionless on the floor, no longer breathing. As for Enyi, the sister-in-law standing nearby, from start to finish she had been frozen with fear by the scene before her, her legs seemingly nailed to the floor. Only when she saw her husband collapse did she snap awake, screaming for help in panic, throwing whatever was within reach at Shenki while trembling as she tried to call the police. But outside at that moment, rain and wind were raging fiercely, thunder and lightning roaring. Enyi's weak cries for help were quickly swallowed by the storm, unable to reach the outside. In his extreme panic, Shenki feared Enyi would call the police, so he found electrical wire and tied her hands tightly behind her back, then used tape to seal her mouth and nose shut. But immediately after, Shenki suddenly remembered that there were still two young nieces in the house. In his panic, he turned and rushed toward the bedroom, intending to restrain the two children to prevent anything unexpected. But when he arrived, Shenki discovered the bedroom door had been locked tight from the inside. Apparently, the two children had heard the commotion and, frightened, had locked the door from inside to protect themselves. Seeing the bedroom door locked tight, Shenki frantically searched the house and finally found a pair of iron pliers. In his panicked and out-of-control state, he used the pliers to pry hard at the door, broke the lock, and burst inside, restraining the two nieces. According to Shenki's later statement, at that moment his mind was completely blank, no longer capable of thinking clearly. In his chaotic thoughts, only one idea remained. Whether he fled or tried to fool everyone, he needed money. Shenki ransacked the house, found his sister-in-law Enyi's bank card, then went back and forced her to reveal the password. In her bound state, Enyi had almost no ability to resist. Finally, Shenki obtained what he believed was the correct password. With the bank card in hand, Shenki felt like he had grabbed onto a last lifeline. He ran straight to the Sheungshui train station, hoping to withdraw money that very night to prepare for his escape. But the password was wrong. The ATM rejected the transaction. The entire plan in Shenqi's head collapsed in an instant. In his extreme anger and terror, Shenqi returned to the Tan home. But when he entered, he discovered that his sister-in-law Enyi and the two nieces had stopped breathing. That was Shenqi's one-sided account. However, immediately after hearing it, investigators realized the story contained quite a few inconsistencies. First was the kitchen area. At the scene, pots, pans, bowls, and chopsticks were scattered messily on the stove, and unwashed dishes remained in the sink. All these signs clearly showed that before the incident occurred, the Tan family had just finished eating a meal. But in Shenqi's account, he said that he and his sister-in-law Enyi were being intimate in the living room, while the two children were watching cartoons in the bedroom. As he described it, no one was cooking, and there was no mention of the family gathering for a meal. So where did all those dirty dishes in the kitchen come from? And it didn't stop there. The secret affair between Shenqi and his sister-in-law Enyi that he reported also revealed many suspicious points. Through actual investigation into the Tan family's daily schedule, police discovered that these two people had almost no opportunity to be alone together. Every day, Enyi and Chenghui left home very early to take their daughters to school. Then each went to their own jobs. Only in the evening did the whole family gather again. As for Shenqi, though he did come to help with the flower garden during a certain period, his work only took place during the day. According to neighbors and acquaintances, Shenqi usually packed up his tools and left before sunset, rarely staying long in the house. Neighbor Huang also provided important information. Since Chenghui and Enyi got married, their relationship as husband and wife had always been very harmonious. He had never heard them raise their voices or argue. On the contrary, Huang often saw the family of four on weekends driving out together for outings, appearing very happy. These testimonies made the picture Shenqi had painted completely fall apart. The more they cross-referenced, the more police realized that Shenqi's initial statement showed signs of fabrication and misdirection. The investigators concluded, this man was very cunning, still deliberately hiding the most important truth. Given this situation, police decided to intensify the interrogation, giving him no opportunity to evade. Finally, under mounting psychological pressure, Shenqi was forced to admit the truth. He confessed that there was absolutely no secret relationship with his sister-in-law Enyi. From beginning to end, it had only been his own one-sided infatuation. According to his new statement, on July 4th, Saturday, Chenghui took the family's small dog to the vet and brought both daughters along for an outing. Knowing that only Enyi remained at home alone, Shenqi's lust was aroused, his base instincts surging beyond his control. He snuck to the Tan home with the intention of harassing, even sexually assaulting, his sister-in-law. But contrary to Shenqi's imagination, Enyi firmly held her ground. She immediately scolded him sternly, warning that if Shenqi didn't leave immediately, she would call for help and report him to the police. Her decisive attitude threw Shenqi into panic. Knowing he was doing something wrong, he hurriedly fled from the Tan home. The next morning, July 5th, Shenqi grew more and more worried the more he thought about it. He feared that what had happened the day before would damage the relationship between the two cousins, so he decided to go to the Tan home to apologize, hoping to smooth things over before it was too late. When Shenqi arrived, Chenghui had just returned from the nursing home, while Enyi was busy in the kitchen preparing lunch. But the moment Chenghui stepped through the door, he immediately flew into a rage, pointing straight at Shenqi's face and shouting for him to get out. Clearly, Enyi had told him what happened the day before. Shenqi desperately tried to explain, but Chenghui gave him no chance. In his fury, Chenghui charged forward, swinging his fist, completely losing all restraint. The two men immediately began fighting, neither willing to back down. What happened next was basically consistent with Shenqi's initial statement. The scuffle spiraled out of control, emotions exploded, and tragedy occurred. The only difference in this version was Enyi's role at the time of the fight. Shenqi said that Enyi was cooking in the kitchen at that moment, and with the heavy rainstorm outside, the sound of rain and wind drowned out everything, so she didn't hear the fight happening in the living room. Only when things had already gone beyond any limit did Shenqi realize he had accidentally caused consequences that couldn't be undone. In his state of extreme panic and fear, he continued making one wrong decision after another, restraining first Enyi and then the two nieces. Finally, with no further evidence to contradict him for the time being, police tentatively accepted Shenki's revised statement and quickly proceeded with the next steps of the investigation. Following his directions, authorities recovered the iron pliers, the fruit knife, and various other tools used during the crime, all of which had been buried in the area in front of the tin-roofed house. Beyond that, by investigating nearby construction supply stores, they quickly identified the shop that had sold cement to Shenki. The shop owner confirmed that on the morning of July 6th, Shenki had come in to order several bags of cement and paid extra to request same-day rush delivery. In the early morning hours of July 7th, police officially began excavating the suspicious area in front of the tin-roofed house. However, the work proved far more difficult than anticipated. By now, the cement layer on top had completely hardened, the surface as solid as stone. Ordinary manual tools were useless, forcing the work crew to use hydraulic excavators to break through the surface bit by bit. But the digging couldn't be rushed. Investigators had to be extremely careful, because even a small mistake could damage the bodies and destroy critical evidence. For 13 consecutive hours, the excavation work slowly progressed. Finally, the burial pit that had been hidden for days appeared before everyone's eyes. Based on preliminary measurements, the pit was approximately 8 feet long and wide, about 6 feet deep, covered on top by a layer of cement nearly 12 inches thick. Inside the pit, police found 4 bodies stacked on top of one another, all wearing t-shirts and shorts. After relatives came for preliminary identification, the identities of the victims were confirmed. From top to bottom, they were the younger daughter Xiao Ying, the older daughter Xiao Wen, and at the very bottom, the couple Enyi and Cheng Hui. Police initially determined that the time of the crime against the Tan family fell between approximately 11:30 a.m. and 3:02 p.m. on July 5th. That morning, Cheng Hui left home to visit his mother at the nursing home and didn't leave until around 11:30, after which he returned home. Meanwhile, at 3:02 p.m., surveillance cameras at the ATM at Shengshui train station captured footage of Shenki attempting to use Enyi's bank card to withdraw money. But just as people were beginning to think the case was merely a tragedy arising from a sudden conflict, the forensic autopsy report completely changed the direction of the investigation. The expert conclusions showed that Shenki very likely had not committed the crime in a momentary state of agitation. First was the condition of Cheng Hui's body. According to the examination results, Cheng Hui's entire body bore nearly 80 knife wounds, a number far exceeding what would be expected from an ordinary fight. Among them, 3 were identified as defensive wounds. If, as Shenki claimed, Cheng Hui had attacked first, it would be very difficult to explain why Cheng Hui's body showed such a dense pattern of wounds with such an aggressive nature. In contrast, Shenki had only a minor wound on his finger, inconsistent with the scenario of a life-or-death struggle between 2 evenly matched parties. This disparity forced police to raise questions. From the forensic evidence, police deduced that the actual scenario very likely played out in the opposite direction. Shenki had struck first while Cheng Hui was off guard, quickly gaining absolute advantage. Only after Cheng Hui had lost the ability to resist did Shenki continue his assault in a concentrated barrage, leading to the victim's death. Second, Enyi and the 2 daughters had all been bound with multiple layers using electrical wire, tape, clothing, and other tools. The actual cause of death for Enyi and the 2 daughters was strangulation by asphyxiation, the murder weapon being the yellow electrical wire around their necks. Enyi's forehead showed 6 laceration wounds, caused by blows from a hard object. On this point as well, Shenki's statement didn't match. He had said that after failing to withdraw money, he returned to the Tan home only to find the mother and daughters had already stopped breathing. But judging from the cause of death, they had clearly been actively killed. Police examined the fruit knife that had been excavated earlier and found only Shenki's fingerprints on it. What did this indicate? It indicated that this knife was something Shenki himself had brought, and its purpose was to commit the crime. Therefore, police concluded that everything he had said before was lies. He had committed the crime with premeditation. So then, what was Shenqi's true motive for the crime? Through deeper investigation, police also discovered that after committing the crime, Shenqi had taken all the valuable items from the house, including approximately 6,000 Hong Kong dollars, about 770 US dollars, in cash. This detail further clarified the financial motive hidden behind his criminal behavior. As mentioned earlier, Shenqi's family circumstances were extremely impoverished. It was precisely because of the pressure of putting food on the table that he had conceived the idea of going to Hong Kong as an illegal laborer, hoping to earn more money to change his family's hopeless situation. In fact, Shenqi's family's old house in Zhongshan had seriously deteriorated, having gone years without repairs. Every time it rained heavily, the roof leaked everywhere, making daily life extremely inconvenient. Shenqi had always harbored a dream of building a proper new house, so his wife and children wouldn't have to suffer anymore. In his desperation, he noticed the ancestral home that his cousin Cheng Hui owned in Huangpu Township, Zhongshan. Cheng Hui had lived in Hong Kong since childhood and had virtually no intention of returning to the mainland to live. Previously, Cheng Hui had even asked Shenqi to look after and clean up this ancestral home. From then on, an idea gradually formed in Shenqi's mind. If he could buy that house at a low price, he wouldn't need to spend an enormous sum building a new house. Initially, Cheng Hui had wavered, even showing willingness at times to let Shenqi move in. But when Cheng Hui's two aunts learned of this, they immediately and vehemently opposed it. Under pressure from relatives, Cheng Hui was forced to abandon the idea. The matter seemed to end there, but for Shenqi, his resentment only grew deeper. He was not only angry inside, but had even once shown up at the aunts' houses carrying a wooden club to talk reason, even making threats that he wouldn't let them off easy. With the plan to buy the ancestral home failed, Shenqi turned to another option, building a new 2-story house for his own family. By that point, the construction crew had already completed the foundation and was preparing to begin the main building phase. However, to finish the house would require at least another 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, about 12,800 US dollars. For Shenqi at that time, this was a sum completely beyond his means. It was in these circumstances that Shenqi once again thought of his cousin Cheng Hui. But not with the mindset of borrowing money. In his twisted thinking, Shenqi believed Cheng Hui actually owed him. The reason stemmed from resentments that had accumulated over many years. Previously, Cheng Hui had introduced Shenqi to a construction job paying 500 Hong Kong dollars, about 64 US dollars per day, with meals and lodging included. But after working for a while, Shenqi discovered the work site was skimming wages, and the actual amount he received each day was only a little over $200, about 26 US dollars. This made him extremely resentful. On top of that, during the many years he helped Cheng Hui renovate and improve the house in Pingche village, the wages Shenqi received were only about 300 Hong Kong dollars, about 38 US dollars per day. At first, Shenqi comforted himself that having a job at all was thanks to his cousin's help, and since he frequently ate and stayed at the tan home, earning a bit less was acceptable. But over time, this thinking gradually warped. He began to believe that Cheng Hui was treating him as cheap labor, even developing suspicions that those skimmed wages had actually gone into Cheng Hui's pocket. On November 23, 2010, the Hong Kong High Court officially delivered its verdict. Shenqi was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The manslaughter charge applied to the older daughter Xiaowen, because when her body was found, her mouth and nose had not been sealed shut. There was insufficient legal basis to prove that Shenqi had intended to kill this particular victim from the start. Ultimately, Shenqi was sentenced to life imprisonment, the most severe sentence in the Hong Kong judicial system. But even faced with this heavy sentence, Shenqi still didn't truly accept responsibility. He believed the punishment given to him was too harsh, stubbornly insisting that the deaths of all 4 family members were merely the result of a momentary impulse, manslaughter, rather than intentional. In an attempt to create mitigating circumstances, Shenqi even reverted to his initial statement, continuing to fabricate the story about a secret relationship with his sister-in-law Enyi, as if the entire tragedy had originated from a love affair. This behavior angered both the judge and the jury. The court flatly rejected all of his changed statements, viewing them as nothing more than excuses to evade responsibility. On August 8, 2011, Sheng Qi wrote another letter to the court, arguing that as a child he had been ill and suffered lasting effects that made him unable to control his emotions, which was why he had committed the crime on impulse. In the letter, Sheng Qi expressed remorse and begged the court to give him a chance, requesting a reduction from life imprisonment to a fixed-term sentence, claiming he wanted to take care of Cheng Hui's elderly mother. Naturally, this request was quickly rejected. Before crimes so serious and consequences so irreparable, justice would accept no further excuses. The case closed, leaving behind a cold warning. Simmering resentment, if not controlled, can destroy not just one person, but an entire family. And that is the case for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.